In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for a common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. And I'd like to say welcome back to another one of our series on In the Lobby. And today we are discussing Father. Kind of discussing how fathers engage with family films, but really we're discussing family films and how we can train up the next generation to mindfully consume. And again, this is the first section here you're going to be listening to is open completely to the public, but the next subsequent episodes are going to be for our premium seating popcorn saints. So if you want to continue to engage in the conversation, go ahead and become a Patreon today. And so to get us started, I will introduce, I am Dad Eric, as my son will call me, Dad. And we've got Daddy Miles over here, and we've got Father Jam. We should just, I can go multiple ways, even if you didn't have any kids. Father Jam just sounds pretty cool. And so with that, we can go ahead and start to get the conversation started. But first, let's go ahead and just couple brief background on ourselves, why we're talking about this topic. And so, Miles, we can start with you.
Yeah, so that's one of the conversations we have as popcorn theologians is not just how we engage mindfully with the entertainment, but what do we do as parents? And as we're excited to share our faith, we can share some of our favorite movies. How do we do that well? So, for example, I have one child, my son Emmett. He's about to turn 4, which means he's starting to be able to watch some movies and get excited. And I've been able to share some of my favorites of the past. Like one of my favorite kids' movies of all time is The Lion King, which he also likes. And I think that this is a conversation that's been a long time coming that we'll probably run through. We've been trying to get Popcorn Theology Junior going. I even sometimes, when I'm done watching a movie with my son, if I take him to the theater, we'll sit down and we'll do welcome movie wubbas and theology nerds is how he'll often say it. And I'll film it just for posterity's sake and ask him, what do you think about the movie? Does this remind you of any stories in the Bible? And see what he can handle. And so I'm hoping that in this conversation we can get a little more common ground and some wisdom on how each of us handles those kind of situations.
All right. And how about yourself, Jam?
Yeah, I have 2 sons. I have Solomon, he's 5, and Caspian, he's 9 months old. Like thinking about movies in general, I remember leading a small group with a mission focus on college campus. And I remember one guy in my community group in particular, he always got annoyed when we would watch movies and I would point out pictures of the gospel or certain biblical characters and things like that, even to the point of I think we watched Moana one time and I was like going through, man, here is all the ways. And he just got so annoyed. But when Tila and I had Solomon, that was a point of conversation on how are we going to engage with media and what is that going to look like? And I had already been practicing a lot of that to begin with. And so, getting into kids' movies, family movies in general, we're very selective on what we view. But the things we view, we are always having conversations, trying to talk through what were important themes, where do we see biblical characters, those kinds of things.
Awesome.
Yeah, what about you, Eric?
Yeah, so I've got just one kid right now, young guy, 14 months old. His name is Calvin. So he's not mindfully consuming too much right now. But I'm already trying to teach him that. We were watching Malcolm in the Middle the other day, and all the fun characters in that. I was like, Calvin, you laugh at fools, you do not imitate them. And I started teaching them that, and we do that with movies all the time. I already taught them. We were watching The Lion King a couple months ago, and I was already telling them, it's like, this is a great catchy song. Talking about Hakuna Matata. It's like, this is a great catchy song. This is terrible life philosophy.
Oh man, yeah, that's one of my biggest points. I think is what you've talked about this with me before, Eric. Is the Hakuna Matata effect? Is the idea that even great movies, like the core message of The Lion King, is largely with great power comes great responsibility, in essence. But what do people go home singing? Hakuna Matata. Right? And it's
such a wonderful phrase.
It's a wonderful song. The movie's songs are awesome, but that whole movie is an exploration of with great power comes great responsibility. You have one song on one end where Simba says, I just can't wait to be king, which means he can't wait to be a tyrant. And on the other hand, when he gets a taste of the harder part of life, he runs away and goes, Hakuna Matata, no worries. And that's the opposite of being a tyrant. It's completely abdicating your responsibility. And what happens with either of those things? Tyrants step in and Pride Rock is destroyed, and the weather is terrible, and Scar is king. What should you really do? You should do, I always call this song My Boots Are Uncomfortable, because it's that's African song as he's running through. My boots are uncomfortable. But really, actually, the English phrase should be, you can hear it in your head, right?
I hear it now.
Are uncomfortable. Or maybe it really should be, I am responsible. I'm going to be responsible. And I'm sorry for anybody who genuinely knows what the language is, but it's just funny what kids pick up is you often, even in a great movie, you can pick up the wrong lessons, and especially children can pick up the wrong lessons because they like a character, they're fun. And I call it the Hakuna Matata effect, where even a great movie with a great theme, great core message, can end up discipling your kid down the wrong path because they were portraying the fool. And they think, because they're so fun, they're enjoying themselves. And so it's even more tricky than with adults trying to raise mindful consumers because of things like the Hakuna Matata effect.
Yeah. And speaking of great movies, honestly, summer is the time for movies. And it's kind of one of the cool things about this time of year and on the modern age that we live in is a lot of movie theaters are doing like family showings. And they're showing a lot of the old movies on releases and stuff. So we definitely wanted to, some of this conversation we're going to have today will probably be a little bit critical of modern media and how they do that, but how we can also engage mindfully. And so we definitely want fathers in particular, because we're fathers, but families in general, to go to the movie theaters, actually get into the movie theaters and develop that experience where going to the movies is a family event. I remember that for myself growing up. Every year, my grandfather would give my parents some money so that we could go and see movies in the theater. Cool. A lot of times it was a Christmas evening showing that we would go and see whatever the newest Christmas movie out there. We had a lot of those great memories. It was
the Lord of the Rings 3 years in a row there in the early 2000s.
Yes,
that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that was the high point of all cinema.
And I've taken my son to a few of those. One thing that's great is they'll replay movies that you've already seen, which means if you've already vetted them. And then for like a children's ticket in my town is like $2 for matinee on these special days, and it's all just parents with kids, little kids. So it's a little loud and stuff, but it's a fun little experience. And my boy loves it. And I went in blind to Curious George the other day. That movie is pretty great. And one thing that's interesting about it though is the man in the yellow hat in this movie. He's trying to get famous and save this museum. But the whole thing is he's trying to find this idol. He's chasing after idols, a giant idol the whole time. And the whole idea is if I get this idol, then, my life will be complete, that kind of thing. But Curious George comes in and messes things up. Eventually, in the end of the movie, he needs to learn to love George more than the idol. And I was like, boy, with a little bit of tweak, that plot can be redeemed. He's got to reject his pursuit of the idol. The conclusion you have to kind of wrestle with. But there's some of these movies. It's fun to see, and you get to have the movie experience, especially once your kid is potty trained. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So Jam, how old are your kids again?
Solomon is 5.
Okay.
So he's at the age I've introduced him this summer to Power Rangers,
Nice.
and that has been phenomenal. Yes. The classic battle of good and evil. It also teaches you that, like, one thing that I love about Power Rangers, they're a team, but it teaches you that they are insufficient on their own. I think of course, we're watching Mighty Morphin, the good one, but
the actual Power Rangers, yeah,
the actual one. So I mean, you have the exception with Tommy, where he's the Green Ranger, becomes the White Ranger, and he's clearly better than all the others. But even still, you have him working together, and they are not sufficient unless they are all together. And so you always have in every episode like the Megazord. Or another thing I just introduced Solomon to is Troll Hunters. Have you guys watched that?
No.
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It is phenomenal. I am not even ashamed to tell you I've cried at watching Troll Hunters. There's 3 seasons on Netflix, and essentially a ancient medallion of Merlin helps this troll people to fight against this evil troll king. And a boy in modern day called Jim Lake finds the medallion and becomes what's called the Troll Hunter. And what's beautiful about Troll Hunters, we finished the series, and he thought it was the coolest thing ever. He wields a sword of light to vanquish the darkness. And the entirety through the series, they're talking about how Jim's humanity is why Merlin chose him. And then Jim goes through all these trials until the very end where he needs to become a troll. And so he has to become the very thing that he's actually fighting to destroy. And so, man, such a beautiful picture of what does that say? And he who knew no sin became sin on our behalf in Colossians. Yeah. Like, that's pictured there, and I cry every time I see that. And we were watching it, and I'm crying, and Solomon looks at me like, "Daddy, why are you crying? This is just so beautiful." Like, oh yeah, let me tell you why it's so beautiful.
Like 2 major steps that have made me cry more in movies. One is becoming a serious Christian, but then when I became a dad, boy, there were some movies that just ripped my heart out. It's not a children's movie, but when I came home from the hospital, my wife and newborn son went to sleep, and I stayed up and I watched that MMA movie Warriors.
Yes.
And the father-son stuff. I just wept.
I know.
I was alone, just weeping over Warrior. It's just, man, the idea of, like, man, you could really drop the ball with your sons, and I didn't want to, just wrestling with that. Or back to sharing Power Rangers. My dad still makes fun of me because I loved Mighty Morphin Power Rangers back in the day, but he always said, they're always so demanding. We need Megazord power now. That's what he extracted from the show. But that show has always been a pretty clear picture of the Holy Spirit for me. It's like Zordon equips this team of people, this fellowship of teenagers with attitude, with power, right? And then they have to go fight evil. And then when all the Zords individually are usually getting all beat up, and then they come together to form the Megazord. That's always been kind of what's in my picture, what's the picture in my head when we see in 1 Corinthians the body of Christ. It's not something I'll share from the pulpit because it's only for people like us who both love Jesus and the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. But that's what I see is somebody's got to be the foot, somebody's got to be the hand to bring the Megazord to move.
That's one of the cool things about it is I watched it with my dad. And so that's one of those things. Like, I didn't come from a Christian family. And so a lot of me watching Power Rangers was just every boy watching Power Rangers wanting to be one and beat guys up. But like now as a Christian dad watching Power Rangers, getting to talk through those kind of themes, I share something that was an awesome experience in my childhood. Solomon just today actually watched the first episode of Digimon. Nice. So like even sharing things like that of like Pokemon or Digimon and getting to, these are things that I watched as a kid, but then getting to rewatch those as a Christian and as a father, and then encourage Solomon, like, hey, let's think about what we're actually watching here. That's been a lot of fun.
So what are some of the things that when you're watching a movie with your sons and you're like, all right, this is what you should be learning from this. Like, this is what the movie's telling you. This is what the show's telling you. But this is how you interpret what they're trying to tell you from a Christian perspective. Give the listeners some a little bit more concrete details, and me too, since I only have a 14-month-old.
Yeah, because we still have our kids that are pretty young. This is kind of preemptive conversation. Like, I think our oldest among us is 5. Mine is 3, which means he's beginning to be able to understand. I've been trying to teach him to put movies in different categories. Like, is this a good guy fights bad guy movie? Is this a good guy that's having a hard time being good? And then I always try to tell him the best stories are bad guy turns into good guy, because that's our story. And then
Jamie Lannister story.
No.
Yeah.
I was like, a little wink to the audience.
I'm there.
Actually,
I know what you're saying.
But it's the basic things. A lot of it, though, is at an early age, you got to start teaching your kids the basic story of the Bible, because what we do as Popcorn Theology is we're always comparing those narratives. And so you need the grammar school version of Popcorn Theology is good Bible study. So Jesus Storybook Bible, I'm a huge fan of the Jesus Storybook Bible, because that teaches them about God's never stopping, never giving up, always and forever love.
That's it,
woven throughout the story. And so, what do you think, Jam? You're a little bit farther ahead. What do you teach your kids to look for?
I think a big thing is virtue. A virtue being like the behavior that shows high moral standards. So you're getting at the idea of, like, is this a good guy versus bad guy? A lot of times, even the good guys are not perfect. And that's a big thing to point out too. I praise God because Solomon, man, he's 5. He's already talking about baptism. I'm convinced my son knows and loves Jesus. He talks about him all the time. He's constantly listening to Little Theologians podcast.
Little Theologians.
Like, he's growing, and the Lord has been faithful and gracious to us. And so I'm constantly trying to teach him. He's got a very sensitive conscience, and praise God for that. But, sometimes that conscience weighs on him to the point of, like, he is just melting down. I'll give an example. The other day, so Caspian's only 9 months old, and Solomon's a great big brother, but he was being a little rambunctious, and he was throwing himself around on the couch and just being a boy, and he wasn't paying attention where his brother was. He kicked him in the head, and his toenail kind of clipped Caspian in the head and cut him a little bit. And Solomon was just distraught, thinking, like, I'm the worst big brother ever, and those kinds of things. And so a lot of the times when I'm watching something with Solomon, if the hero within that story has a flaw, I'm trying to point that out. And I'm trying to show him, hey, like, this guy's a good guy. But look, he's not as good as you think he is. Power Rangers is a really easy one with Tommy. Solomon's all about the Red Ranger, but then when Tommy came, he was like, "Oh no, I like that one." It's like,
yes,
yeah, you should.
I think everyone did.
He floats down from heaven when he becomes the White Ranger.
Yeah, and it's just a beam of.
One obvious example for that is I took my son to see Despicable Me, and so that's a story in which, in part, bad guy becomes good guy. But at the end of the day, he's still stealing stuff. And so, at least for my son with the conscience, it's like he's a good guy in this movie, but is he an all the way good guy?
Yeah,
no.
That's what I did with Tommy. He's like, he's Green Ranger first, and then he goes to White Ranger, and we watched that whole arc. But even before he becomes Green Ranger, he seems like he's a good guy. And then we just talked about him becoming the Green Ranger, how it's actually showing his heart. His heart was evil to begin with. And so, we get into conversations about, like, Jeremiah tells us the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? And, Solomon, that means that you have an evil heart. I have an evil heart. Mommy has an evil heart. But the way in which our hearts do more good things is by the power of the Spirit, changing us, conforming us more into the image of Christ. And the only way that we are not going to continually only be evil is through Jesus. And so that was a really cool gospel connection. And then he becomes the White Ranger. So then it's like, look, it's like Tommy has accepted Jesus. This is what it's like. And look, he's empowered to do good things with the Power Rangers now. He's working together with them, no longer against them, and get to talk about how that fits into. So a lot of times we're trying to do stuff like,
he's still dealing with his old sins, but
that's what is it? R.C. Sproul had a book, The Priest's Dirty Robes. Have you guys read that?
I heard he did a audio version of it, so I've heard at least a couple chapters of it. Yeah,
you guys should buy it and read it to your sons, because my goodness, it is an awesome book. And in that book, he talks about this priest that has to go preach before a king, but along the way he has mud all over his robes, and then he ends up running into the prince, and the prince tells him, "I'll take care of it." And so he comes before the king, and the prince quite literally gives his priestly garbs, or his prince garbs, over to this priest. And now the priest is able to be in the presence of the king to actually preach. And that is, I mean, wow, that's beautiful. We actually connected the dots, that he did it himself, connected the dots to Tommy and the White Rangers. Like, yep,
what a glorious moment that your son is connecting the dots. It's so awesome.
Yeah.
that is cool. So what you were talking about, I always liked, because I'm more of an apologist than a theologian at heart, honestly. I like to draw the parallels. And one of the things that the first episode I ever had the privilege of being on was when we covered the second part of Rings of Power, which is a terrible, terrible television show. No one should ever watch it.
And I liked it. Ignorance is bliss.
But one of the things that we talked about in that was, you can see in the character of Isildur, his brashness at such a young age. In that, you actually see those seeds. You see those, like, he seems innocent. He just seems like, hey, he wants to do good. He wants to go his own way. And he wants to create his own thing. But you see the seeds that, no, that's the same guy who a couple years later is going to be arguing with Elrond about keeping the ring for himself. And it's cool to start to draw those parallels, and that's usually how I engage a lot of cinema, honestly.
We hope you enjoyed this first episode of our In the Lobby series. To watch future episodes, click the link in the description to support us on Patreon and become a patron saint. Subscribe on YouTube for more content, follow and interact on social media to share with others, and remember, you are not a mindless consumer.